Welcome to Childcare Conversations with Kate and Carrie.
We hear this all the time. They just have allergies.
Is it allergies or is it pink eye? That is the morning question that probably gets asked the most.
Or
in
is
people's
it a
heads, it might not come out loud, but it's...
Or is it an allergy or a sinus infection or an ear infection? And then they tell you, oh, they're just teething. Give them this aspirin when their fever gets way too high, or children's Tylenol. So medication is always one of those things that the parents always want you to do something.
Well, they don't always, because there are programs that have the rule, we don't give medication. And
Okay, well,
parents know that when they enroll.
Let me finish.
Okay.
The parents try to get you to give them medication, or they give medication in the parking lot. But as providers, you need to know what you should, what you have to, and then what kind of documentation do you need to be able to do the parent, oh, I want you to put this ointment on my child because I said so.
Okay, so I think one of the things I want to hit on before we get too far into this episode is that Kate went to nursing school. And so Kate has additional information on this topic that not every director has. So first I want to talk about when people say, well, our school just doesn't do medication. What are some reasons that a school might have that policy? What are some of the dangers? Why are people making that choice?
Well, I think people are making that choice for a couple of different reasons. One, they have a perception of legal issues, right? So they think that if they do it wrong, they're going to get sued. Perhaps they just don't like the paperwork. It could be that they had one nasty parent that kept trying to do things the way they wanted it done versus maybe perhaps what you were trained, or maybe even what their pediatrician is telling you.
Or what minimum standards in your area required.
Right. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're not really sure how medication fits into your state, you need to make sure that you know your state's requirement as far as original containers. And this is for both over-the-counter or OTC meds, as well as prescription meds or creams. So it's not just oral. That also includes certain creams. And so make sure that you're really clear.
What do you mean by certain creams? Give an example of something that is a medication cream and something that's not a medication cream.
Well, there is medication creams for everything from poison ivy to, anti-itch creams. There's even medicated diaper rash ointment. And then there's over-the-counter that includes sunscreen, bug spray, diaper ointment, right? So all of these are things that fall into either over-the-counter or prescription. And you still need to know what your state's say is on that.
Because some states, you can't even put hand lotion on a child without written permission. Right. So find out what your rules are.
But Carrie, there are some, and I know you and I talked about it, so I'm going to throw this back to you. What are the 4 things we can't not give?
Okay, so anything that would be covered under Americans with Disabilities Act. So anything that is necessary for somebody who has a diagnosed special need. And that includes being an asthmatic. Being an asthmatic is a diagnosed special need. So if you have a child who needs nebulizers for their asthma, that is life-saving medication. So if it is life-saving or if it is because of a disability, you have to give it. So nebulizers could fall into either of those categories. But other than a nebulizer, a good asthma doctor will probably be able to prescribe other medications to be given outside of school hours. But what if you have a diabetic? Insulin is both life-saving and a chronic medication for people who have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, or can be. So we have to give nebulizers. We have to give insulin or glycogen if it's the other end. Then if you have somebody who has a seizure disorder, there might be anti-seizure medication that a person needs. And then, anaphylaxis. So if somebody has a severe allergic reaction to things and they might need a shot of epinephrine, or what we call an EpiPen in day-to-day speak, those are 4 examples of things that you can't say, I'm not going to give. You can't say, you can't enroll in this school because you have a anaphylactic response to fire ant bites. You have to accept that child, and you have to be willing to give that child the shot of epinephrine. So, and that is national. This is not just a Texas rule. That is a national rule. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a national rule. And the not the bystander law. What is, where you have to give, render first aid if you are capable? That's a national law. I can't remember what it's called. So those 2 laws come into effect. So you're going to have to do those types of medications. But I don't want to give Tylenol every 3 hours to a teething baby, that's a little bit more at your discretion. Well, actually, it's not at your discretion. You can't give it every 3 hours without a doctor's prescription, because that is counter to what's on the label. Because the label says every 4 to 6 hours. So the parent who wants you to give Tylenol every 3 hours, not without a doctor's prescription, no sir, no ma'am.
Okay, so you just brought up a great point, and so let's touch base on that. So parents will bring in over-the-counter medication, but want you to give it differently than what it says on the bottle.
Or the way that it's set on the bottle is based on the weight, and you don't have a scale to weigh that child.
So my suggestion, especially for any of those, if this is something that you even kind of aren't really sure about, always ask the parent to get a doctor's note on instruction. With that stays with your medication log. Now, some programs do medication logs digitally, some do them in paper, some do them by the child, some do them by the day, some, everybody.
Some by the classroom.
Yep. So however you do it, I do want you to remember that this is also confidential. So this shouldn't be something that every parent should be able to see everybody who gets and what they get, because you don't want a parent with a medical background to see that another child in that classroom is getting a certain med, and this now gets gossiped about. So if you have a you have a client who, perhaps might be taking medication to prevent the rejection of a transplant. If you have another medical professional who's a parent and they see this, then all of a sudden they may be like a little confused, and they may want to know more, and they may have a lot of questions, and then they may start talking to parents trying to find out more about whoever the child is with a transplant, because you recognized a medication on the med sheet. So not only do the parents not need to be able to see it, but make sure it's nowhere that licensing sees. This is a confidential record.
Yeah, licensing can see it if that is the thing that they're inspecting. Okay, so there are requirements probably in your licensing rules about how medication is given and what's on the sheets. And so they can see that.
They can see the sheet.
To anything.
Yeah.
Yes, that is related to how licensing says you have to do stuff. But we want to keep that information confidential. And the staff who aren't the ones giving the medication also should not have access to the meds sheet. It should just be whoever is responsible for giving that medication. And in some programs, it's just the administrative staff. They're like, the medication can only be given by the director or the acting director. So if that's your program's policy, then you need to make sure that whoever steps in, if you have to run to HEB to get milk, knows how to give that medication. So that's part of handing off the designated director job when you have to step out, or when you're on your lunch break, for goodness sakes. Like, you don't have to be in the building and should not be in the building from open to close every day. Good Lord, you'd lose your mind.
There's several podcasts on that. Go back and listen to them. So, but one of the things that I'd like you to remember, if you're listening to this and you're feeling a little overwhelmed by just the concept of having to have these written instructions from doctors, what the parents tell you, yada, 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 and you like the idea of being more simple, you might like it, but just remember that limits your population. And so, and we're not talking about vaccines or vaccines by choice or not by choice, because that could literally be its own episode. But I do want you to know that if you're not really sure where to start, or you don't feel comfortable with teaching this information, we have a course. You can get the link in the show notes that you could have your staff take on administering medication.
And it was vetted by somebody who went to nursing school. And a lot of it is based on stuff from the Centers for Disease Control. And, it is good information. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to do everything. You can be like, hey, I don't want to be the one responsible for giving out the medication. I have this one person who is super good at always following a process. I want that person to be the medication person. That's fine. It doesn't have to be a member of the administrative staff. But again, that person needs a backup in case, right?
And what's great about that is that person now has a unique role in your program. So again, if you're trying to help your staff develop their goals, if you have a staff person whose long-term goal is to maybe go into medicine, either as an EMT or as a medic or as a nurse, or maybe they want to go to med school or become a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner, this is a great opportunity to give them something to be in charge of that will help them build their skills in their resume. It also means that they're responsible for making sure that all the documentation is in order for whomever might need to see it in your state. Okay. Our suggestion from a best practice standpoint is to keep all your medication logs together and not necessarily try to separate them out by date or by month or by child or by classroom. Because you don't, unless you give a lot of medication, that means you've got a lot of maybe 1 to 5 things, regularly on sheets. And I've seen programs that do it by the week. I'm not sure I would do it that way, but you also need to know whether or not medication needs to be refrigerated and at what temperature. So there's all kinds of components related to antibiotics, especially those that need to be refrigerated that are in liquid form.
Also, some insulins need to be refrigerated.
Absolutely.
And if you have medications that you give at your program that need to be refrigerated, you need to have a separate container in the refrigerator. And if at all possible, it needs to be one that has at least a hasp lock. Okay.
So I would suggest
people might not know what a hasp lock is. How do we explain a hasp lock?
Well, I was just going to suggest that you keep a locked refrigerator in the director's office. And they either come with locks that are built in, or it's a lock that you've added to the door that you can just pick up at a Home Depot.
Yeah, you can do that too. There are refrigerator medication safes you can probably find on Amazon. Maybe we'll find one of those and add it to our notes for this episode, so that you have an idea of what we're talking about. Because I'm like, I talked about a thing and I don't know how to explain it. So we're just trying to make sure that you are thinking through different ways to handle medication. And remember that even if you have a no medication policy, it's actually not a no medication policy. And you still need to have training on life-saving or chronic medications.
And this goes all the way through, if you have kids, all the way through age 12. So definitely make sure you know what your state's policies are on everything from
school-age children and their backpacks. And they may have asthma inhalers. They may have Tylenol. There's a possibility of a lot of things in school-age children's backpacks.
PMS meds.
Uh-huh.
So
that's a whole other thing. And your staff, this is part of the reason why we don't want staff to have their personal backpacks or purses in the classroom, because we have medication in those, and accidental ingestion of medication is one of the primary reasons people have to call poison control. So we don't want there to be opportunities for accidental ingestion of medication. So people cannot bring their personal bags of stuff into the classroom, and that includes our school agers and their Midol.
Yep.
Their Midol can't be in the classroom.
Cannot be in the classroom. All right. So if you've got questions, feel free to reach out to Carrie or I at carrie@texasdirector.org and kate@texasdirector.org. And we would be happy to point you in the direction for resources for training for your state. Or if you've got questions just in general about how to give an EpiPen injection, that actually is normally a part of a first aid CPR course if you've gone through the American Red Cross. And so if it's not part of the first aid training you and your staff participate in, go find that training because it's definitely worth having.
Yep. Okay, so this is an episode that I think might be a good one to share with your owner or your board so that they understand a little bit about the risks and different ways that you guys could handle medication, because you might need to change some stuff in your handbook. So make sure you share this with the appropriate people at your school. And as always, if you have a topic that you would like us to discuss, please email us at kate@texasdirector.org. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Childcare Conversations with Kate and Carrie. Want to learn more? Check out our website at texasdirector.org. And if you've learned anything today, leave us a comment below and share the show.